Okay, I think we are ready to begin. I want to thank you for joining me on this broadcast. My name is Dan Weiser. I am the artistic director and founder of AmiciMusic, based out of Asheville, North Carolina, and here in Baltimore, Maryland. And tonight we are going to do part one of A Woman's Voice. This is all solo piano music written by women composers. Tonight we will explore music. It's actually going to be from 1765 up until 1853. So about 100 years in the classical and romantic periods. A couple names you will probably recognize: Fanny Mendelssohn, the sister of Felix Mendelssohn, and Clara Schumann, who married Robert Schumann. But the first few people I will play, you may not know. Marianne Martinez, Mariana Auenbruger, and Maria Szymanowska. So hoping to get these names out there and let you hear some of this wonderful music. Part two of this program will be next Saturday night, also at 7:30. And that will be live on location in Asheville, actually in Black Mountain, North Carolina, at the White Horse Black Mountain, one of the first places that AmiciMusic played. It's a phenomenal music club that mostly does indie and folk music. But Bob Hinkle, the owner there, has been very supportive of having classical music in his old Chevy gas station there, Chevy dealership. And so we're going to do this program next Saturday night live from there. They have their own live stream. And again, you can look on our website for that information. And that one will include music of from 1850 to about 1935, some French composers. And then we're going to come to America. We'll finish that program with two fantastic African-American women, Marian Bonds and Florence Price, who wrote some incredible spiritual-based music in the 1930s. I'm also hoping that my two daughters, who are now 14, the twins, Emma and Sophie, are going to sing a couple songs on that, give their women's voice just as a little break in the middle of that. So that should be pretty fun next Saturday night. I hope you can join me for that part two. And that, again, is a donation concert. Donations going to both AmiciMusic and the White Horse. And tonight, if any of you make donations, they will go to AmiciMusic, and a portion of the proceeds I will give to the Maryland Food Bank as well for all the great work they're doing in this pandemic crisis. And also, just to let you know, on Sunday night next week, I'm going to do a second concert live from the White Horse. This is going to be all the good dead white men. It's called Bach to Beethoven. Get it? It's going to be from Bach to Beethoven, music of Bach and Haydn and Mozart and Clementi and a little Beethoven. So that's Sunday night at 7:30. I'll tell you some great stories, I hope, about the composers and give you that music. And lots of other great programs. The following weekend, I'll be in Port Jefferson, Long Island, and hopefully doing a forehand program with my nephew, Noah. That's still in the works. And I'm also in the middle of a Chopin Zoom course. I've done 2 classes. There's 2 more to go. And if anybody wants to join that, you can go and check out on AmiciMusic.org, the Chopin class. You can register for the next 2 classes. One is on Monday afternoon, so you got to do it fast. I'll send you the Zoom links for that. But I hope you enjoy this wonderful program. I'll get started now. Now, there were, of course, women writing music before 1765, but not really too much for the piano. This only because this is a relatively new instrument. It was only developed in the beginning part of the 1700s and didn't really reach its modern size and form until close to the 1800. So the early works we're going to do were probably written more for a forte piano, a smaller version of the piano that Mozart would have used. Sometimes there were pedals, they were knee pedals, not foot pedals on those. And there was a sort of transition instrument from the harpsichord into the modern piano. But there were many women beforehand who wrote, and one, the most famous, Hildegard von Bingen, who was one of the medieval women. She was kind of a mystic who got direct visions from God. She wrote many different liturgy pieces, and you can read about her, these chants that are really just wonderful. And then in the Renaissance period, women like Francesca Caccini, Barbara Strozzi, Isabella Leonarda, many of them the daughters of important musicians or scholars in Florence during the Renaissance. And then in France, there was a wonderful harpsichord player, Elisabeth Claude Jacquet de la Guerre, during the Baroque period, who wrote some wonderful pieces. But I wanted to start off with Marianne Martinez and Mariana Auenbruger, who both knew each other and lived in Vienna at the end of the 18th century here. Before I start, I always have to give some of these horrible quotes by men about women. I'm always embarrassed to do it, but gotta go through with this thing to give you the sense of what these women were up against, the barriers in society, getting their voices heard. The great Greek philosopher Aristotle once said, "A woman is an unfinished man who, like children and barbarians, are not competent in the ways of thinking." And then as we move into the Enlightenment period, right around the time when we're going to be playing these first couple pieces, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, an enlightened philosopher, supposedly, said the following: "Women in general do not like any art, know nothing about any, and have no genius. They can acquire science, erudition, talents, and everything which is acquired by dint of hard work. But that celestial flame which warms and sets fire to the soul, that genius which consumes and devours, that burning eloquence, those sublime transports which carry their raptures to the depths of hearts, will always lack in the writings of women. Their works are all cold and pretty as they are. They may contain as much wit as you please, but never a soul. They are 100 times more sensible than passionate." That's a little odd at the end, because most of the criticism against the women composers was just the opposite, that all they could do was have passion and didn't understand the intellectual side of composing. If we go and jump ahead to 1880, George Upton, in a book called Women in Music, said, "Not only are women too emotional and lacking in stamina to write music, but a woman's mind simply cannot grasp the scientific logic of music making. It does not seem that woman will ever originate music in its fullest and grandest harmonic forms. She will always be the recipient and the interpreter, but there is little hope she will be the creator." Havelock Ellis, a few years later, wrote, "Music is at once the most emotional and the most severely abstract of the arts. There is no art to which women have been more widely attracted, and there is no art in which they have shown themselves more helpless." And one other terrible quote by Hans von Bülow, who was a famous conductor, friends with Wagner until Wagner stole his wife, Cosima. But von Bülow said, "Reproductive genius can be admitted to the pretty sex, but productive genius unconditionally cannot. There will never be a woman composer, at best a misprinting copyist. I do not believe in the feminine form of the word creator." Gobbledygook, terrible. There have been women that could do composing, but Amy Fay, who was a wonderful pianist who studied with Franz Liszt, said it pretty clearly as to why there were so few that had made it. She said, "Women have been too much taken up with helping and encouraging men instead of placing a proper value on their own talent, which they are too prone to underestimate and to think not worth making the most of." And that, to me, is the most insidious part of all of the barriers that were put up in front of the women, is that the internalization of that feeling that they were not worthy, that they couldn't write music, becomes pretty prevalent. And we're going to see that especially in Clara Schumann, who sort of stopped writing music because she just didn't think she should be the one to be the first great composer. Fanny Mendelssohn had similar difficulties when nobody seemed to give her any love, like her brother, who should have. But let's start with some music, and we'll begin with Marianne von Martinez, born in 1744 and dies in 1812. She actually grew up in the same building as a struggling young composer named Franz Joseph Haydn, and also the well-known poet Metastasio, who also wrote some libretto for some operas. So she had some good people around her supporting her. She became a very strong singer and a pianist and performed numerous times for the Empress Maria Theresa. She and her sister hosted weekly soirees at their home, and some of the guests included people like Haydn and Mozart. And in fact, Mozart wrote a couple of four-hand piano sonatas to perform with Martinez. So he knew her as a very good pianist. She actually wrote over 200 works, including a symphony, oratorio, piano concertos, and was the first woman admitted into the Accademia Philharmonica of Bologna in 1773. She also started her own singing academy for young women in Vienna towards the end of the 18th century. Charles Burney, who was a famous writer about music in this period, met her while on his travels, and he said the following: She played for me a Latin motet for a single voice, which was grave and solemn, without languor or heaviness. And then she played me a very pretty harpsichord sonata of her own, which was spirited and full of brilliant passages. And at the time, it was sort of par for the course that all young girls, young ladies, would play piano or sing. It was sort of considered the middle class thing to do. Here's a terrible description of all this in an important German magazine in the year 1800. It says the following: "Every well-bred girl, whether she has talent or not, must learn to play the piano or to sing. First of all, it's fashionable. Secondly, it's the most convenient way for her to put herself forward attractively in society, and thereby, if she is lucky, make an advantageous matrimonial alliance, particularly a moneyed one." So for many, it was just sort of a way to get married. But some of them did go past that, Marianne Martinez being one. I'm going to play this piece that we think was written in 1765. It's in 3 short movements: the Sonata in E major, an Allegro Moderato, an Andante, and then an Allegro. Please enjoy. music of Marianne Martinez. Not very well known, but again, fairly prolific, writing over 200 works in her lifetime. Our next composer sadly died at the age of 23. And in fact, we only have one piece that we know that she wrote, which I'm going to play. But really had some incredible promise. Her name was Mariana Von Auenbruger, born in 1759, dies in 1782, probably of tuberculosis. Her father was a well-known physician in Vienna, Leopold Auenbrugger, who knew Leopold Mozart quite well. He had she studied with Haydn and with Salieri, and in fact she had a sister, Caterina, a younger sister, who also played piano. They played duets together. Leopold Mozart once wrote, he said, "Both of the sisters, in particular the elder one, play extraordinarily well and are thoroughly musical people." Haydn ended up dedicating actually a cycle of 6 piano sonatas that he wrote to the sisters in 1780. And we have that dedication that he wrote at the time. He said, he's writing to his publisher, "I send you here the corrected proofs of all 6 sonatas. The approval of the Demoiselle von Auenbrugger is most important to me, for their way of playing and genuine insight into music equal those of the greatest masters. Both deserve to be known throughout Europe through the public newspapers." So he was certainly thinking that Auenbrugger could get known for her playing and for her composing, but as I say, unfortunately, she only wrote this one piece that we know of, which she didn't publish. Actually, Salieri ended up publishing this in memorial to her after her death, and that is why we have this one in print, thanks to Salieri. It really shows a lot of the Mozart style that I think you'll hear. So this is written in 1782, we believe. The sonata in E-flat major. We'll have a Moderato first movement, an Andante, and then a very fun Rondo Allegro for the third movement. fun work, sadly the only one that we have by Mariana von Auenbruger before she would meet her very early death. All right, we're going to leave Vienna now and move over to Warsaw, Poland. Some of you are part of my Chopin Zoom class, and I've been doing a lot about a young Chopin born in 1810. And this woman actually came before Chopin, and in many ways may have been a very big influence. We know that Chopin heard her play concerts in 1825 and 26 in Warsaw. And she was one of the first to be writing nocturnes and mazurkas and polonaises, pieces that we now associate with Chopin. So we might have to give her some credit. She was born in 1789, and she would actually die in 1831 during the cholera epidemic in Russia of that year. Was one of the first great professional virtuoso pianists. And in fact, she is credited with actually being one of the first to perform solo piano concerts with memorized music. Before that, you would often have music, like I always have music in front of me. We usually give Franz Liszt or Clara Schumann the credit for that, but Maria Szymanowska was doing it at least 10 years before Clara was doing it. She was actually the mother of 3 children. One of them, Celina Szymanowska, married the Polish romantic poet Adam Mickiewicz, who would become very important for Chopin. Mickiewicz wrote a lot of these great epic ballads, and that's what Chopin based a lot of his ballades on the poetry of Mickiewicz, who was her son-in-law. She was born from a Jewish family and had studied for a little while with Joseph Elsner, who also taught Chopin, and he started the Warsaw Conservatory, gave her first public recitals in Warsaw and Paris in 1810. She also was friends with Rossini, John Field, who also wrote some of these early nocturnes, and Goethe, actually, as a very old man, I think in his 70s, fell madly in love with her. She actually ran this salon in St. Petersburg, where a lot of rich and famous celebrities came to, and many of them fell in love with her. Robert Schumann actually did write a little bit about her in his book on music and musicians. And he described Maria Szymanowska. He said, "This name must recall charming memories to many. We have often heard this virtuoso called the feminine field, and to judge from her etudes, not without reason. They are delicate azure wings that neither raise nor depress the scales, and that no one should roughly touch. If we should praise women highly when they only play etudes, we ought to do even more when they write them. However, these are really good and improving, especially for studying figuration, ornaments, and rhythm. If we detect the uncertain woman in form and harmony, we find also the woman full of feeling, who has much more to say if only she knew how. In character and invention, these present the most remarkable qualities for a woman composer that we have ever met with. But we must remember that they have been published a long time, and that much in them that was new and extraordinary then has become common property since." So he was trying to say that she was doing some pretty advanced stuff that then became part of that sort of romantic field led by Chopin. So I'm going to play this work that we think she wrote in 1810, a nocturne in B-flat major. You can definitely hear Chopin in this piece, and you wonder if maybe he got some of his inspiration from listening to this music. So there's some lovely music by Maria Szymanowska, a Polish composer who actually became the pianist to the Tsar in her later part of her life. Wonderful, wonderful romantic writing, great filigree. All right, so we're going to do two composers more of the famous composers. This is Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel and then Clara Wieck Schumann, both in Germany. Fanny was born in 1805, 4 years before her famous brother Felix, and would unfortunately die early on in 1847. She died of a stroke just a few months before Felix, who also died of a stroke. They had that in their family. She was the granddaughter of the well-known Jewish philosopher Moses Mendelssohn, and Moses had begat Abraham, the father, who had not gone into great intellectual pursuits, but had made a lot of money as a banker in Berlin. And the family home there was the center of some really wonderful culture. Members of the orchestra of Berlin Philharmonic and others would come to the home for these Sunday soirees, led by the mother, Leah Solomon, who was a good amateur pianist herself and had come from another wealthy banker family. And they would have these weekly soirees, and young Felix and Fanny would listen to this amazing music and sometimes write music for these people to play. The father actually converted them both when they were young kids, Fanny when she was 11, Felix when she was 7. That was the year 1816, when there were a number of anti-Semitic laws basically saying if you were Jewish, you had no hope of getting a job in the state. So they were converted early on. And she was an incredible piano prodigy. Her mom said she was born with Bach fugue fingers, very long fingers that could make these different lines come out in a great Bach piece. And she loved Bach the most. And we're going to hear the first piece I'm going to play is a fugue, obviously inspired by her love for Bach. She actually, as a gift to her father on her 13th birthday, she memorized all of Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1 and played it for him. Although he thought it was impressive, he thought it was a little too much. Thought she was exerting herself. It wasn't so womanly to be doing that. And he sort of chastised her for doing all that, which is horrible to think about. She wrote her first piece when she was 14 years old and would write, we think, over 460 works. It's a lot of works. Very few of them were published in her lifetime. In fact, we keep finding new ones in libraries and places. She's just a remarkable, remarkable lady. She did study some composition with a teacher, Karl Zelter, because Zelter would come into their home to teach both Felix and Fanny from 1818 to 1821. He was the director of the Berlin Sing Academy. But it was clear early on that music was not a possible profession for her. That was not, as an upper-class woman, middle-class woman, it was really not something you could do. You couldn't think about even making a career as a pianist, really. That was for Felix. And we have a letter written in 1820 from Father Abraham, which spells this out pretty clearly to 15-year-old Fanny. She had obviously written something nice about something that Felix had done, and he said, "What you write to me about your musical occupations with reference to and in comparison with Felix was very rightly thought and expressed. Music will perhaps become his profession. But for you, it can and must only be an ornament, never the root of your being and doing. We may therefore pardon him some ambition and desire to be acknowledged in a pursuit which appears very important to him, because he feels a vocation for it, while it does you credit that you have always shown yourself good and sensible in these matters, and your very joy at the praise he earns proves that you might, in his place, have merited equal approval. Remain true to these sentiments and to this line of conduct. They are feminine, and only what is truly feminine is an ornament to your sex." Horrible. Felix was recognizing pretty early on there was some great genius in Fanny. He once wrote her a letter saying, "I tell you, Fanny, that I only have to think of some of your pieces to become quite tender and sincere. You really know what God was thinking when he invented music." But the father kept persisting, and in 1828, on her 23rd birthday, he penned her even some sterner words, telling her it's time to get married, saying, "You must become more steady and collected, and prepare earnestly and eagerly for your real calling, the only calling of a young woman, I mean that of a housewife. Women have a difficult task, the unremitting attention to every detail, the appreciation of every moment for some benefit or other. All these and more are the weighty duties of a woman." And she really sort of took this to heart, sadly. She actually wrote to her future husband saying in 1829, "I am composing no more songs, at least not by modern poets that I know. I now comprehend what I've always heard and what the truth-speaking Jean-Paul has also said, art is not for women, only for girls. On the threshold of my new life, I must take leave of this plaything." So again, it becomes part of them. I'm going to play this wonderful fugue that she wrote, probably in 1824 or 25, so under 20 years old. This, again, the fugue is the most intellectual of art forms, and it was her way of showing I can do anything that a man can do. Very powerful fugue, showing she could do anything. Counterpoint is very difficult. Anybody who's ever tried to write a fugue knows how hard it is. Bach could do them in his sleep, but they're very difficult to just have that same sort of subject coming up in different keys. Wonderful writing. The one person who really did support Fanny in her music was her husband, William Hensel, who was a painter. And in fact, he said he would not marry Fanny unless she continued her composing. Every morning of their marriage, before he went off to paint himself, he would put a piece of blank manuscript paper on her music stand and tell her he needed to see it filled up when he returned. She ended up actually writing the music for her own wedding because Felix ended up messing up his knee and not being able to come on time. He was supposed to write the music. They did have one son whose name was Sebastian Ludwig Felix, named after her three favorite composers, Bach, Beethoven, and her brother. And he would actually write the first book about the family, and that's how we know at least something about Fanny as a composer, because nothing was really written about her during her life or much after. When he had this child, though, she started to lose inspiration musically. She was busy, obviously, and she must have written something to Felix saying she had no more good ideas now that she was so busy with the baby. And he writes back one of the worst letters in the history of brotherhood that I can imagine. It says the following: "You can hardly expect a man like me to wish you some musical ideas. It is just greediness for you to complain of a scarcity of them. If you wanted to, you would already be composing with might and main. And if you do not want to, why do you fret so? If I had a child to nurse, I would not want to write scores. Seriously, this child is not even half a year old, and you already want to think of ideas other than Sebastian? Be happy that you have him. Music fails to appear only when it has no place." Wow. I don't know how she ever talked to him after that, but in fact, she did. Worse than that, she actually wrote to him when he got married in 1836, wrote a beautiful piece of music that I now want to play, where clearly she was exploring some great things. This is the Allegretto Grazioso in B flat, written in 1836. a beautiful, beautiful piece of music written for the wedding of Felix to his wife. Wow, my papers are flying everywhere again. All right, so we are now in about the year 1836. And in that year, the father Abraham died. And I think Fanny may have thought this would be her opportunity now to talk to Felix and see if he might help her get some of her music published. She actually wrote to him a letter in October of 1836, right after the father died, saying, "With regard to my publishing, I stand like a donkey between two bales of hay. I have to admit, honestly, that I'm rather neutral about it. Hensel, on the one hand, is for it. You, on the other, are against it. I would, of course, comply totally with the wishes of my husband in any other matter. Yet on this issue alone, it's crucial to have your consent, for without it, I might not undertake anything of the kind." So she really did need her brother to step forward at this moment. And she even, I think, talked to her mother to see if she might help, because there's a letter from her mother to Felix in 1837 saying the following: "Please permit me a question and a request. Shouldn't Fanny publish a selection of her lieder and piano pieces? That you haven't requested and encouraged her to do it, this alone holds her back. Wouldn't it therefore be appropriate for you to encourage her and help her find a publisher?" But he was stubborn, and it's not clear why he was. Maybe he thought she would outshine him. I think a large part it was just, again, this cult of domesticity, that the woman's place was somewhere else, not as a public professional career. And he says that in the following writing letter back to his mother. "From my knowledge of Fanny, I should say that she has neither inclination nor vocation for authorship. She is too much all that a woman ought to be for this. She regulates her house and neither thinks of the public nor of the musical world, nor even of music at all until her first duties are fulfilled. Publishing would only disturb her in these, and I cannot say that I approve of it. If she resolves to publish, either from her own impulse or to please Hensel, I am quite ready to assist her as far as I can, but to encourage her in what I do not consider right is what I cannot do." And unfortunately, she would then spend the next 10 years not publishing. But she writes this really powerful letter a year later to a guy named Karl Klingemann, who was a diplomat and an amateur pianist who had played some of Fanny's pieces and loved them. And so she had written him a letter with a couple more piano pieces and said the following: "I enclose 2 piano pieces, which I have just written. I must add that it is a pleasure to find a public for my little pieces, for here I have none at all. My songs lie unheeded and unknown. If nobody ever offers an opinion or takes the slightest interest in one's productions, one loses in time not only all pleasure in them, but all power of judging their value and the wish to create more." Terrible sentence. "I am thus more or less alone with my music, but my own delight in it and Hensel's sympathy keep me awake, and I cannot help considering it a sign of talent that I do not give it up altogether, though I can get nobody to take an interest in my efforts." Really a terrible letter, but really we see her heart there, and even though she pretended she didn't want to publish, she clearly did. And I'm going to play now this Nocturne that my cousin Janice told me about and sent me. Thank you, Janice. A wonderful piece of music written around 1838 at the same time period, Nocturne in G minor. Really powerful, romantic piece of music there. Well, fortunately, in 1846, she had had enough. She couldn't hold it in any longer, and the publishers Butt and Bach made her some offers to publish some of her old piano pieces and Lieder, and she did it. And then she sends this incredible letter to Felix in 1846 with the following. I have to tell you something, but since I know you won't like it, it's a bit awkward to get underway. So laugh at me or not, as you wish. I'm afraid of my brother at age 40, just as much as I was a father at age 14, or more aptly expressed, desirous of pleasing you and everyone I've loved throughout my life. And when I know in advance that it won't be the case, I thus feel rather uncomfortable. In a word, I'm beginning to publish. I hope I won't disgrace all of you through my publishing. I trust you will in no way be bothered by it, since, as you can see, I proceeded completely on my own in order to spare you any possible unpleasant moment, and I hope you won't think badly of me. If it succeeds, that is, if the pieces are well liked and I receive additional offers, I know it will be a great stimulus to me, something I've always needed in order to create. If not, I'll be as indifferent as I've always been and not be upset. And then if I work less or stop completely, nothing will have been lost by that either. A full month passes before Felix responds to this. I don't know what he was waiting for. He finally does say the following. Dear Fanny, I send you my professional blessing on becoming a member of the craft. This I do now in full, and may you have much happiness in giving pleasure to others. May you taste only the sweets and none of the bitterness of authorship. May the public pelt you with roses and never with sand. And may the printer's ink never draw black lines on your soul, all of which I devoutly believe will be the case. And when she receives that letter, she writes in her diary, at last, Felix has written and has given me his professional blessing in the kindest manner. I know that he is not quite satisfied in his heart of hearts, but I am glad he has said a kind word to me about it. Now, over the next couple months, actually, there are some nice reviews about her music, about Opus 2. The review says, the outward composition betrays no trace of a female hand, but allows rather the supposition of a masculine, serious study of the art. And another one said, we express our sincere thanks to the artist for the publication of these works. They will be welcomed by everyone who cherishes beauty within art. And in February of 1847, she actually writes a nice diary entry saying, it is enticing to have this manner of success at an age when such pleasures for women who experience them at all are usually at an end. And she begins writing at this moment her piano trio, biggest work yet, 30-minute wonderful piece of music. Sadly, on May 14th, while rehearsing one piece for her salon, she has her stroke and dies, right when everything is starting to fall in place. A terrible tragedy. Felix is distraught. He actually comes and finds her trio and publishes it. At least he does that. So it's published as Opus 11 because Felix gave it to his own publishers, Breitkopf and Hartel. But a terrible story that Fanny is just unable to get her brother to appreciate her. And the history seems to say that Felix and Fanny were very close, and indeed they were. But you really wish that he had just offered her something. He clearly knew she knew how to write music. I'm going to go out with one last piece she wrote. This is an Allegro from around 1837. To me, this is a real cry saying, I really need to get my voice out there. end to Fanny there, dying young, just when everything was coming together. And it's so sad, again, that Felix did not come to her help when knowing how great the music was. The next composer, the last composer I'm going to do now, Clara Schumann, is almost sadder because she just internally shut down. Despite writing some amazing pieces when she was 15, 16 years old, just could not believe she could be a great composer. Really, we lost out on so much, and partly because I think she just couldn't compare herself to Robert at the time. She was born in 1819, lives a very long life until 1896. She was the daughter of Friedrich Wieck, a well-known piano teacher who taught her extremely well. He was doing some revolutionary ideas of teaching, sort of taking walks amongst nature, having her read books. She actually couldn't speak until she was 6 years old or so, but she could play the piano when she was 4. And he really molded her into one of the greatest pianists of all times. Her parents actually got divorced when she was about 5, and she never really saw her mother after that. She makes her debut at the Gewandhaus, the famous concert hall in Leipzig, when she's 9 years old, and begins touring all around Europe as a young girl. In 1829, while playing at a private party, she meets young Robert Schumann, who at the time was in law school. He's a law school dropout like myself. He actually dropped out soon after hearing Clara play, and he said, I want to be able to play the piano like that. So he decides to study with Friedrich Wieck and ends up moving in with the family for a little while. Although soon enough, the father realizes that's not a good idea as Clara sort of falls in love with him. She begins writing music when she's only 12 years old and writes most of the works that she didn't write a lot, but most of what she wrote before 17. There's only a few pieces that she wrote later in her life. Mostly she was out touring as a great child prodigy. Goethe once said she plays with the strength of 6 boys, and they actually had a torte à la Wieck cake named after her in Vienna, and in Paris she was also celebrated as well. But in 1835, there's the first kiss between Robert and Clara, which horrifies the father, and he ends up taking her away for about a 2-year period, hoping she will forget this out-of-work bum, Robert Schumann. But she writes some secret letters to him and says the following to Robert: How love makes one so receptive to everything beautiful. Music is now quite another thing for me than it used to be. How blissful, how full of longing it sounds. It is indescribable. I could wear myself out now at the piano. So often it is my consolation when I would like to cry at our separation. And it's in this period that she writes the Opus 6, the Soirees for piano. There are 4 pieces altogether. I'm going to play 2 of them, probably heavily influenced by a visit, both in 1835 and 1836, from Frédéric Chopin, who came from Paris, stopped in Leipzig to see Clara. He had heard stories about this amazing pianist, and he said she was the only one who could play his La Ci darem la mano variations, Opus 2, that Robert had written a famous review about. So he met Clara, and of course Robert was there as well. Didn't really care about Robert. At that point, Robert hadn't written anything great, was mostly a music reviewer, and Chopin thought he was nuts, and he was a little nuts. But in this set of pieces, Clara writes a Mazurka and a Nocturne, clearly inspired by what she had heard from Chopin. So I'm going to play the Mazurka now, and you get that folk quality that we also associate with Chopin. Here's written when she's 15 years old. magical piece, understanding that whole dance form of the Mazurka. Now, the Nocturne, also part of this set, is an incredible work. And what's fascinating about it is it's part of a musical conversation that she's having with her boyfriend, Robert, through these letters. Robert wrote, right around the same time, his very famous work, The Fantasy in C Major, which was his love pouring out of him, longing for her. And he uses this theme, very dramatic, and he puts it with this other stuff. Just this very extroverted kind of melody. Clara takes that same tune, the exact same notes, and puts it in this dreamy internal love that's just so magical. Here's the Nocturne, Opus 6, number 2. Some magical writing and some harmonies that were just out there. People were not writing harmonies like that at the time. She was inventing things, and partly because she didn't have the training. She really sort of did it on her own, and that, I think, opened up some good avenues for her. Amazingly, Robert reviewed this work and wrote a beautiful review about it. Maybe a little bit of nepotism because he was in love with her, but I think he really captured the essence of these pieces. Here's what he wrote. The soirees betray, on the one hand, plain for anyone to see, a life effulgent and tender, apparently responsive to the slightest stirring. On the other hand, a wealth of unconventional resources, an ability to entangle the secret, more deeply twisting threads, and then to unravel them, something one is accustomed to expect only from experienced artists and males. Ugh. About her youth, we would agree. To evaluate the rest, one must appreciate her position as one of the supreme virtuosos of the time, with insight into everything. Let Bach penetrate to a depth where even the miner's lamp is threatened with extinction. Let Beethoven lash out at the clouds with his Titan's fists. Whatever our own time has produced in terms of heights and depths, she grasps it all and recounts it with a charming maidenly wisdom. At the same time, she has raised her own standards to a degree that leaves one wondering anxiously where it all may lead. I venture no predictions. With such talents, one is confronted with curtain after curtain. Time lifts them one by one, and what is revealed always differs from what was expected. That one cannot contemplate such a wondrous phenomenon with indifference, that one must follow her spiritual development step by step, may be expected of all those who in this singular time acknowledge the natural intimate relationship of kindred spirits, past and present, rather than mere accident or chance. What do we have then in these soirees? What do they tell us? Who do they concern? Are they comparable with the work of a master? For one thing, they tell us much about music, how it surpasses the effusions of poetry, how one can be happy in pain and sad when happy. They belong to those who can delight in music without the piano, whose hearts swell to the bursting point at the sound of intimate yearning and inner song. And they belong to those already versed in the fraternal languages of a rare species of art. Are they finally a result? Yes, in the way a bud is a result before it breaks out in the splendid colors of the blossoms, fascinating and important as is everything that harbors a future. And then, of course, to hear them as she plays them, one hardly knows what has struck him or imagines how such a thing can be recorded in symbols and written out. This is an astonishing art, and it is all hers. A remarkable review. Sadly, around this time in her diary, Clara writes the following statement. I once believed that I had creative talent, but I have given up this idea. A woman must not wish to compose. There never was one able to do it. Am I intended to be the one? It would be arrogant to believe that. That was something with which my father tempted me in former days, but I soon gave up believing this. May Robert always create. That must always make me happy. And it did seem that as her relationship developed with Robert, as he composed more, she could not compare herself well to his music, even though I think she wrote some better music at this time. In a letter in 1839, she says to him, I have a peculiar aversion to showing you anything that I have composed. I am always ashamed of it. Women always betray themselves in their compositions. Robert, for his part, really understood how important Clara was to him. He once wrote, you complete me as a composer as I do you. Every thought of yours comes from my soul, just as I have to thank you for all of my music. They do finally get married after going to court to fight her father, who didn't want it, in 1840. She writes, they have a marriage diary that's beautiful, where they both take turns writing. Clara wrote in February 1841, Father has always laughed at so-called domestic bliss. we enjoy a happiness such as I have never known before. How I pity those who do not know it. They are only half alive. So it's a beautiful love affair. Unfortunately, they end up having 8 children in pretty rapid succession while she's trying to have a career as a pianist, while he's trying to compose everything in kind of a cramped quarters. And later in 1841, she complains in the diary. She says, "My piano playing is falling very much behind. This always happens when Robert is composing. There is not even one little hour in the whole day for myself. If only I don't fall too far behind. I can't do anything at all with my composing. I would sometimes like to strike my dumb head." They do end up writing a set of songs together, 12 songs altogether. She writes 3 and he writes 9. She actually, again, puts herself down talking about the composition of the song. She says, "Whenever Robert went out of the house, I spent my time attempting to compose a song, something he always wanted. Finally, I succeeded in completing 3, which I will present to him at Christmas. If they are of little value, merely a very weak attempt, I am counting on Robert's forbearance and hope that he will understand that it was done with the best will in the world in order to fulfill this wish of his, just as I fulfill all his wishes." And then there's an incredible statement by Robert in 1842 after he hears some of her new compositions. He says, "Clara has written a number of small pieces recently that show a musical and tender invention that she has never attained before. But to have children and a husband who is always living in the realm of imagination do not go together well with composition. She cannot work at it regularly, and I am often disturbed to think how many profound ideas are lost because she cannot work them out. But Clara herself knows that her main occupation is as a mother, and I believe she is happy in the circumstances and would not want them changed." Again, echoing some of the words of Felix Mendelssohn. As I mentioned, they have their 8 children. 1 dies in infancy, 3 others die before Clara. Another dies in a mental asylum. None of them become musicians. Kind of a tragic lineage to her family. And Robert, in 1854, would ultimately try to kill himself. He was bipolar and heard a ringing in his ear, constant A coming in his ear. He doesn't succeed killing himself, but he spends the last 2 years of his life in a mental asylum. But right before he goes in the asylum in 1853, Clara would write one of the last pieces that she wrote, a birthday present in June of 1853, variations on a theme by Robert Schumann. I'm going to close the program today with that piece. Just to let you know, also in that year, 1853, she wrote a letter to her new friend Brahms. Brahms had come into the home in September of 1853. And interestingly, the last child Clara bore was 9 months later in June of 1854, at which point Robert was already in the asylum. He never saw the last son, Felix. And in fact, if you look at pictures of Felix, he looks an awful lot like Brahms, but I'm not going to go there for now. We do know that Clara and Brahms fell in love. Brahms actually moved into the home while Robert was in the asylum, but they never did get together as a couple, but they loved each other, it is clear. And Clara wrote to Brahms the following: "When I am able to compose regularly, I feel really in my element. Quite a different feeling seems to come over me. I am much freer and lighter, and everything seems to me bright and cheerful. Music is, after all, a good piece of my life, and when it is wanting, I feel as if I have lost all physical and mental elasticity. There is nothing greater than the joy of composing something oneself and then listening to it, if only because through it one wins hours of self-forgetfulness, living in a world of sound." So this last piece has kind of an interesting, again, history of musical quotation in it. We have to go back actually to one of the first pieces that Clara wrote, her Opus 3, which is a romance written in 1832 when she was 13 years old. She dedicated that piece to Schumann, and in fact was the first time that their 2 names appeared on the same page together, Clara Wieck and Robert Schumann. And she said, "I hope this won't be the last time." The dedication, though, is, again, that sort of demeaning of herself. Robert, at the same time, was working on a little variations on that theme. I'm going to play both of these. And so Clara writes this letter to him. She says, "Sorry as I am to have dedicated that trifle to you, and much as I wish not to see the variations printed, yet the evil has come to pass now and cannot be altered. Your able recasting of this little musical thought will make good my mistakes. So I beg for this. I can hardly wait to make its acquaintance." So what she's talking about here, let me play you the theme from her romance. Here's her beautiful theme. And she goes off for about 10 minutes on that thing. Now, Robert decided to write a piece called Impromptu, based on a theme of Clara Wieck. And what he does is he takes the bass line of the theme. So there's understood. And it's just that. So the melody is. It's kind of an ingenious way of taking a melody out of the bass. Well, why this is important is that now, in this last piece that Clara writes, she ends up quoting again back to this theme. And you'll have to hear it. It's towards the end of the piece. You'll hear in the very bass line this. So she's quoting herself and Robert quoting her. And just to add one more layer of craziness, after Brahms, a year later, would write variations on this same tune and would put himself into the love triangle as it was. So there's a wonderful story behind that. But this piece that I'm going to play now, as I say, was a birthday present to Robert in 1853, taking a beautiful theme that he had written a couple years earlier. So she writes in January of 1853, "Today I begin to work again at last. I am much freer and lighter." And then she says, "I began to compose, writing a variation on a theme of Robert's out of his Bunterblätter for his birthday. I find it very difficult to write now. The break has been too long. It seems to me that it may not be a failure." But then when she writes the dedication, she says the following: "For my dear husband, on June 8th, 1853, a weak attempt once more on the part of his Clara of old." I don't think it's a weak attempt at all. I think it's a beautiful set of variations on this theme. And again, listen for her own little theme in there as well. And after this, we will call it a night. I hope to see you all next Saturday night for part 2 of our show with some music by Louise Farenc, Cécile Chaminade, Melanie Bonny, 3 French composers. Then we'll come to America for Amy Beach. And then 2 African-American women, Marion Bonds and Florence Price. Also a ragtime by Adeline Shepard. Should be a great, great concert. And I'm also hoping that my 2 daughters, Emma and Sophie, are going to sing a couple songs, adding their women's voice to the program. That will be on location at the White Horse in Black Mountain. No audience is allowed, but we will do the live stream from there. So check out my homepage there, the webpage. There's a link that will come up for the White Horse for that. And then on Sunday night as well, we're going to do the Dead White Guys back to Beethoven with music of Bach and Mozart and Haydn and Beethoven, Sunday at 7:30. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope the live streaming has been better. I think it's going to be good now. I hope there hasn't been glitches because I've got it all Ethernet. Here is our final work, the wonderful variations on a theme by Robert Schumann, by Clara Schumann. Ooh. Sorry, did I go away for a second there? I hope not. Anyways, sorry about that. Something was coming in on my computer right at the end. Such beautiful music. Anyways, if you're able to make a donation to AmiciMusic, please check out our page, AmiciMusic.org. There's a yellow donate button there. Thank you for spending your evening with me here. And we will see you, I hope, next Saturday night. Again, if anybody's interested in the Chopin class on Monday afternoon, send me an email. You can see that on our website as well. So have a great night, and we'll see you next week.